I moved into this neighborhood for peace, privacy, and a little slice of quiet life. I'm not even in the HOA, never joined, never wanted to, but apparently that didn't stop Karen. She's the type who believes rules are optional if she decides she's the enforcer. I had no clue she had me marked until the day I pulled into my garage and found it occupied. Two massive Ford Raptors sat side by side. Engines off, but their presence roaring like a challenge. Tires scuffed the concrete. Mud streaked the polished floors. My garage, my property, invaded without a single phone call, note, or hint. I froze. For a moment, I wondered if this was a prank or some bizarre mistake. Then I saw Karen standing across the street, arms crossed, glaring at my house like she owned the place. I called out to her, asking what the hell she thought she was doing, but she didn't even flinch. Instead, she held up a clipboard with that trademark smirk and waved it toward the Raptors as if the paperwork made her actions legitimate. She claimed the vehicles were authorized community service vehicles, though no one in the neighborhood or anywhere had seen them before. According to her, she was protecting me from violating imaginary HOA rules, and this was a temporary measure. Neighbors peeked out their windows, some confused, others trying not to laugh. It was absurd. I wasn't in the HOA. I wasn't on any lists. I hadn't done anything remotely wrong. But Karen didn't care. Her sense of control was absolute, and boundaries meant nothing. I spent the next few hours staring at my garage, thinking about how to get my property back without making things worse. Karen had assumed that by placing the trucks there, she could intimidate me into compliance. She had no idea she'd chosen the wrong person to mess with. I had the keys. I had ownership. And I had patience. Karen may have parked two beasts in my garage, but she had no idea that the game had just begun. Karen spent the next morning patrolling the cul-de-sac, clearly proud of her handiwork. The two Raptors sat in my garage like monuments to her self-appointed authority, gleaming under the morning sun. She strutted back and forth, clipboard in hand, pointing out to neighbors how she had taken action to enforce HOA standards. Some of them looked confused. Others tried to hide smiles. She thought everyone was on her side. I, meanwhile, stayed inside, reviewing the situation. The garage was technically part of my property. The Raptors weren't hers, and I wasn't in the HOA. That meant she had zero legal authority to touch my property. Every law, every deed, every clause I could think of confirmed it. She had overstepped in a way that was blatant, audacious, and frankly, comical. I decided to approach this with calm, quiet strategy. I called the non-emergency line of the local sheriff to report trespassing and unlawful placement of vehicles on private property. While I waited, I reviewed the HOA bylaws she had likely tried to manipulate. Everything she claimed about authorized vehicles and community service was nonsense. None of it applied to someone outside the HOA. None of it applied to a private garage, and certainly none of it applied to trucks she didn't own. Within an hour, deputies arrived. Karen, of course, tried to intervene, waving her clipboard, insisting that the trucks were part of her enforcement plan. She shouted that she was protecting community standards and preventing a violation before it happened. The deputies listened patiently, then asked her for proof. She had none, only her assertions, her smile, and her misplaced sense of authority. I opened the garage, stepped aside, and let the deputies examine the vehicles. The titles were in the names of other HOA members, none of whom had authorized Karen to use the trucks. The deputies explained that she was trespassing, interfering with private property, and that any further action could lead to citations or charges. Karen's confident grin faltered. She tried to argue, tried to redirect blame, and tried to enlist neighbors as witnesses, but the truth was unassailable. The vehicles had no connection to the HOA's authority, and I had every legal right to remove them. Finally, with her protests falling on deaf ears, The deputies asked her to leave. She reluctantly obeyed, muttering threats about fines and escalating this to the board, but the street had already shifted. Neighbors whispered about her audacity. A few even chuckled at the idea that she thought she could park 2 massive trucks in someone else's garage and call it enforcement. Once she left, I closed the garage, breathed a quiet sigh, and reflected. Karen had overreached spectacularly. She thought the Raptors would intimidate me, but in reality, they only revealed her recklessness. She had underestimated one simple fact. I own my property, and property ownership trumps HOA fantasies every time. The trucks were gone, Karen had been confronted, and the neighborhood had seen the truth. Authority without legitimacy is just noise. But this wasn't over. Karen's ego wouldn't let her walk away quietly. Karen wasn't done, even after the Raptors had been removed. Within a few days, she returned, armed with paperwork, signatures, and her usual swagger, claiming that the HOA had retroactively approved her actions. She argued the trucks were community assets temporarily stored to protect property values. Her confidence made her seem unstoppable, but the neighborhood was watching this time. I stayed calm, letting her theatrics unfold while I organized my evidence. Property deeds, local ordinances, and a detailed record of her unauthorized actions. Every notice she posted, every vehicle she placed, every claim she made was documented, dated, and supported by law. By the time she approached my garage again, I was ready. I opened the garage door with a calm smile. The Raptors were gone, but the space between us had never been clearer. I presented the deeds and a concise summary explaining why her actions violated the law: unauthorized entry, misrepresentation of HOA authority, and interference with private property. Her eyes widened. For the first time, she wasn't smirking, arguing, or trying to command obedience. She realized her power had limits, and her attempts to control someone outside the HOA were invalid. Then I handed her a copy of the formal complaint filed with the county. It detailed every incident: the parked Raptors, posted notices, and attempts to assert authority, and outlined potential consequences, including fines, restitution, and restrictions on HOA interference with non-members. Karen flushed with anger and disbelief. She muttered about procedures and escalation, but the truth was undeniable. Her moves were documented, her violations provable, and her attempts at intimidation meaningless. Neighbors watched quietly from their porches, some filming the confrontation. Her audacity had failed spectacularly and publicly exposed her overreach. Finally, she left, muttering under her breath. The garage door closed. My property remained mine, untouched and respected. The Raptors were gone. The neighborhood had witnessed the outcome. And the lesson was clear: authority without legitimacy is nothing but noise. From that day forward, Karen avoided my property entirely. The cul-de-sac regained calm, and my garage stayed exactly as it should: private, secure, and under my control. Patience, preparation, and legal ownership had been enough to confront audacity and win. If a neighbor or HOA oversteps boundaries, don't stay silent. Know your property rights, document every incident, and take action legally. Share this story to warn others and remind them: knowledge, preparation, and lawful ownership are your strongest defenses against intimidation and unauthorized control. Stand firm, protect what's yours.